Very good, thank you, Perry. So little work was done in Wellington on November 20th, 1962. Much of the city had its eyes trained on Cook Strait, where one man was working very hard indeed. Barrie Devenport had gone into the water at Cape Terrafiti that morning, aiming to become the first man to swim the strait. This history is massive, and all of us here are part of it. We owe a debt of gratitude not only to Barrie, but also to the team that helped him across. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to announce the Barrie Devenport Posthumous Lifetime Award. And to receive the award, on behalf of Barrie, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ian Greenwood. So there's a famous photo of Barrie at the end of his swim. You may recall it's Barrie in the centre and a gentleman on the left and a gentleman on the right, which were swimmers, support swimmers. Ian was the gentleman on the left.
Well, thank you, and it's a great privilege for me to be here this evening, I feel, in such salubrious company. It's just staggering, the stories I've already heard. Way back in Barrie's day, and firstly I must say I appreciate the opportunity and the privilege of being able to receive the award on behalf of Barrie and his family. But back in the day, it was all very new to us. The person who actually got us thinking about whether we could attempt a crossing of the strait was a chap called Bill Penny. And Bill Penny was a member of the Maranui Club at the time, and he had tried valiantly to get across, and I'm sure that with the right information and team behind him, he would have done it. He certainly showed he had the capabilities. But it turned out that in Wersa Bay, it's one of the oldest surf clubs in New Zealand, and it seems funny that you've got a surf club in the inner harbour area. But every time the Aramoana went past, we all had a surf, so that was part of the deal. But we also had a swim that from the Sea Dune Wharf to Wersa Bay, about 800 metres, I think, and that was set up as a handicap event at the club in 1910. And as I understand it, it's still going today, and it was opened up to public swimming at one time. But that's where our thinking about these things started to happen. And we were sitting at the bay one day, and and the suggestion was, why don't we just give it a go as a relay team? And we happened to be entered into the Days Bay to Eastbourne swim, and I'm not sure, but I think that still goes today as well. And we thought after that we'll all swim back to Wersa Bay and see how we get on. Well, we completed the swim to Eastbourne all right, but only two made it back to Wersa Bay. One was Barrie and the other was his brother Graham. The rest of us all opted out somewhere just past Ward Island. But it was enough to see that Barrie had the capabilities then. We hurriedly got organised. We had a chap in the club, Ken Mitchell, will be known to some people here. Ken was a stickler for organisation, and he organised the team. There were hurried meetings with Frank Delabarca at Island Bay, who was the fisherman there, and it all took off on the 1st of March 1964, which was just a couple of weeks after we'd done the swim across from Eastbourne to Wersa Bay. And it was interesting that at that time, the day was almost a perfect day. There was a good clear sea and not too many, the swells were there, but it wasn't anything to be too concerned about. And Barrie swam his guts out all the way. He went to within 2 to 3 kilometres of the South Island and just rolled over on his back, exhausted. But that swim got him really thinking, and when we got back over the coming months, he communicated with the Channel Swimming Association and got a lot more information about how he should condition himself and how he should prepare for a swim. We knew little about the tides or the currents of Cook Strait, and Jim Cornish gathered a lot of information from the Marine Department about the tides and the currents that needed to be contended with. And of course, Frank Delabarca had a lot of practical experience as a fisherman operating out in the strait. So from that, Barrie started swimming regularly in the Wellington Harbour throughout the winter, conditioning himself. He contacted Arthur Lydiard, who put him onto a training program, a jogging program, and I can relate to what Meta was saying about he wasn't very fussed about running. He'd much rather swim 5Ks than run it. And but all of that was to get him prepared for what lay ahead. In his conditioning, his wife refused to refused to sleep with him because he insisted on sleeping in the bed with only a sheet over him in the middle of winter, all to sort of become conditioned to the sort of conditions he would strike on the swim. Well, as I mentioned, Ken Mitchell was a bit of a stickler for organisation, and he insisted on backup on every position. I think in the finish we had a team of 20 people supporting Barrie on his straight attempt, and on both attempts, but we had people involved, like we had the pilot boat with a navigator and an assistant navigator. We had the guide boat, which was a row boat, which trailed behind the pilot boat, the Christina. And then we had a feeder boat, which had the feeding apparatus and everything that Barrie needed to be fed along the way. There were assistants, there were, what do you call them, outboard motor operators and assistants, and the whole team of people involved. We had even walkie-talkie operators, and I don't know whether some of you know what a walkie-talkie is these days, but it was a radio telephone the size of a brick, and you'll be interested to know that to get those operating properly, we had to nail a wooden rod to the bow of each of the rowboats that were accompanying Barrie in the water close to him, to get the messages through to the pilot boat, the Christina, and keep the communications flowing. The feed boat operated it was and I'm not sure, Phil, we still operate this way, but it was a baby's bottle, plastic baby's bottle with a teat with a hole in the top, cut out big enough for Barrie to suck Complan out of it and get some sustenance from that. And so with all those positions, and then we were fortunate because it was his second swim, and everybody's imagination throughout the country had been aroused, I think. And we had the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation, I think, had a technician and an announcer accompany us so that everybody could be kept informed as to what the progress was along the way. So off we went. Barrie was the pacer swimmers, and I think that's a bit of an anomaly. Pacer swimmers, Barrie set the pace pretty much, and we kept him company in the water, and I think it was more a psychological barrier that we helped him through. I can remember swimming alongside Barrie and eyeballing him just within a hand's touch away, and that was one of the things that came back to me when I was thinking about this. And the other thing was the depth of the water, the sense of the depth of water we were swimming in. the sunlight seemed to hit the water and just constantly disappear into the depths. So you were very conscious of swimming in the deep water. But Barry's pace was something. I think he was clocked at doing 60 strokes a minute from a good part of that swim. Slowed a little bit towards the end. But as we neared the end of the swim, conditions changed, as is so often the case in Cook Strait, and we started to get blown off course a bit. The water chopped up, and but we could see the sheer cliff of the Arapawa Island there, the South Island, and we set off for that, and with a couple of stops along the way, we finally managed to swim through what was just simply slimy, thick kelp to touch the sheer rock face going up out of the water. And then we had to clamber up onto the rocks, as Brett has mentioned. And the barnacles on the rocks were tiny barnacles, but they were razor sharp and very uncomfortable to be standing on, I can assure you. Somebody provided a spanner from I don't know where, and handed it to Barry, and he knocked a piece of the cliff face off to take home as a souvenir. Yeah, that was pretty much the swim. Boats had come out from Picton, and there was great excitement, as you can well imagine, when Barry accomplished the swim. And we had, during the course of the day, the Bristol freighters from Blenheim through to Wellington would come down over us. The Aramoana veered slightly off course so the passengers could see what was going on. But that was a most eventful day, something I will always treasure as a memory. And we set off back to Island Bay. I've got a vivid memory of Frank Delabarca with a oilskin sou'wester hanging down from his head, and he was covered right down to his toes, hanging onto the wheel outside the wheelhouse while we're all huddled inside in the cabin, and the spray just breaking over him as we punched back through some of the swells on the way back. We got back to Island Bay about 10:30 at night, I think. The next day, it seemed like all hell had broken loose in Wellington. Barry was accorded a civic reception hosted by the mayor. There were members of parliament there, and you name it. It was a big deal. The place was packed, and everybody was elated with what Barry had managed to achieve. Some little time after that, he met up with Keith Holyoake, the Prime Minister at the time, and he was talking to Keith, and Keith said to him, he says, "Do you realise that we had to, what was it, the term he used, I can't remember the exact word, but the Parliament ceased so that the members could hear the final stages of the race, or the swim being broadcast." But he said, "You had us worried there at one stage." He said, "What did you stop for when you were so close to the end?" And Barry, with a twinkle in his eye, and quietly said to him, "I just had to have a pee." And that was typical of Barry. He was a likeable rogue. He was, what could I say? He was a fun-loving person, bordering on or devilment, I should say, but he was also very hospitable and generous, and I have a special reason to be eternally grateful to Barry, because when I was a gangly teenager, I was on a tram, they used to call them Fiducia trams, heading from the city out towards Seatoon. And I saw this beautiful blonde, blue-eyed blonde get off the tram, and in her slinky, tennis outfit, waving her racket to her friends who were carrying on to Seatoon. And I at that time, I prayed that I would meet a girl like that one day. Would you believe it? Within 2 or 3 weeks of that time, Barrie came to me, he says, I'd like you to make up a foursome. We're going out to Tidai Bay. He was going with a girl at the time, and her girlfriend was there, and he said, I'd like you to make up a foursome. Well, it turned out when I met this girl, it happened to be that girl of my dreams I'd seen on the tram on the way home, so prayers can be answered. And it's my wife Carol, who's with me here this evening. She's put up with a lot over the years. I've heard it from all of you here tonight about the sacrifices others have to make. Well, Carol's had her fair share of sacrifices as far as we've been concerned, but I'm happy to say that we've lasted for, over 60 years now, so I think I must be doing something right. But I'd just like to finish on one note, that when Phil asked me if I'd come and talk this evening, I thought, I said to him, Phil, that's a long time ago. And you know what? With all the tact and diplomacy in the world, he said to me, yeah, he says, I wasn't even born then. And I thought, that makes me feel ancient, if not prehistoric. Thanks.
And so Ian is going to accept the Lifetime Award for Barrie Devenport. And we also have a Maui Award to present to Ian for his support.